So as Richard appropriately asked, he wanted to learn a little bit more about Lag BaOmer, and this morning seemed like a really good time to revisit. We're just a couple of weeks away from Shavuot. We're 2/3 of the way through the Omer, and it seemed actually like a really good moment. And as I said, there was some conversation this week about like, well, what is the Omer? What is Lag BaOmer? What are we doing with all this? So it seems like a really good opportunity to kind of build that out a little bit. As far as the Torah text is concerned, counting the Omer comes from verses we read this morning, chapter 23, verses 15 and 16. Usfartem lachem mimachorat haShabbat, miyom haviachem et Omer hatnufa, shaba shavatot mimot tiyena. Ad mimachorat haShabbat hashvi'i tisapru 50 yom, vikravtem mincha chadasha la'Adonai. And from the day on which you bring the sheaf of elevation offering, the day after the Sabbath, and that's somehow connected to Pesach, but the day after the Sabbath wording is very, very vague. You shall count off 7 weeks. They must be complete. You must count until the day after the 7th week, 50 days, then you shall bring an offering of new grain to the Lord. And as far as the Torah is concerned, that is the entire commandment. Anything else that we are familiar with, any observances, we may know or may observe, all it is in the text is a countdown, a 50-day countdown, or really as it were a 50-day count up. We start from 1 on the 2nd day of Passover, and we get to we count the 7 weeks, the 49 days, and then the 50th day is Shavuot. Beyond the actual counting, the best known practices of the Omer are actually recognizable as some modified Jewish practices of mourning, especially in the period of the first 32 days. And some takes on these practices include not shaving or getting haircuts, which again are very traditional mourning practices in the Jewish community. Not listening to any live music, so no concerts or anything like that. I mean, I think there would be a lot of people who would even be in traditional observance who would stay away from an open mic night or a bar with a band playing in it. And withholding from celebrations, including weddings and large communal celebrations. None of that practice has any root in the Torah. The most text-based source we have for these practices comes from the Talmud, which the Talmud recounts that the great sage and Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs of students, most of whom died in a plague that began over Passover and miraculously stopped on the 33rd day of the Omer, on Lag BaOmer. And for what it's worth, the stated reason for that plague in the Talmud is that his students were not treating each other with proper respect. But so the idea behind the counting, behind the mourning practices, was all of these really intelligent, at least, it seems intellectually intelligent, if not emotionally intelligent enough to treat each other with respect. All of these great sages died en masse over this 32-day period. And then the 33rd day we hold as this day of celebration in memory of the plague stopping. And the story, perhaps not surprisingly, is not, if we put it in historical context, is not necessarily so straightforward. According to Arthur Waskow, who I love any excuse to open this book and read his writing, Seasons of Our Joy, a modern guide to the Jewish holidays. The Talmudic explanation may have in fact been a cover-up for much more tragic events during the time of the Talmud, which would have been the purging of Rabbi Akiva's students as retribution for their support of the Bar Kokhba rebellion at the hand of the Romans. And of course, we read about Rabbi Akiva's own martyrdom and torture during, well, we don't do it because we don't do that part of the Yom Kippur service. But Rabbi Akiva's suffering at the hands of the Roman Empire is recounted in the Yom Kippur Musaf service. And so the Talmud might have used kind of the spiritual language of a plague to cover up what was really the political language of tension between the Jews and the Gentile communities around them. Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, in his own book on the Jewish holidays, expounds on this by saying that armies of empires traditionally marched in the spring. And so this time between Pesach and Shavuot that might otherwise have been a time of joy, over the years was a time when the Jewish community would suffer at the hands of foreign powers with this kind of annual show of force. And there's not necessarily the day, whatever Lag BaOmer represents in that historical take, whether it would be, a victory in a small battle or the retreat of a foreign army, but that there would be a more political and less spiritual explanation there. There is another association with the day of Lag BaOmer, with the 33rd day of the Omer, which is said to be the yortzeit of the great Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, a disciple of Rabbi Akiva, who has his own Talmudic story about escape from the Romans. After criticizing the empire, he escaped to hide in a cave for 13 years with his son, subsisting on a miraculous carob tree and a natural spring that were found inside the cave. And so there is actually an additional tradition with Lag BaOmer of eating carob, not just Tu B'Shvat, but also Lag BaOmer. And his yortzeit, on the day he died, Lag BaOmer, he was said to have revealed great mystical secrets to his students, and he commanded them to rejoice and not to mourn. And so an additional reason that the Jewish community has for celebrating on Lag BaOmer is that commandment of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and even the bonfires that are characteristic of the celebration of Lag BaOmer, and that unfortunately played a role in the tragedy on Thursday night, which took place around this great rabbi's burial place. The bonfires that many Jewish communities like to have are kind of a tribute to the great light that emanated from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And so we recreate that with however we can create light, which is, bonfires. And there's one more story to the counting of the Omer, and that is viewing it as a period of waiting. In the Torah, it's waiting for the main wheat crop to ripen. In the rabbinic mind, it's waiting for revelation to happen and the giving of the Torah 7 weeks after the Exodus. Whichever lens you view it through, or even if you want to take both at the same time, it's certainly a period that would be incredibly fraught. We're counting the days until we see if our hopes and dreams come true or if they wither in the sun. We can see how this intensity and anxiety might manifest itself as looking like a community in mourning. A haggard people constantly sporting a 5 o'clock shadow, too jumpy to plan celebrations or relax and let their breath out. And on this last possibility, Waskow explains that Lag BaOmer, 2/3 of the way through, might have just become a communal day to agree to relax a little bit amidst all this tension and anxiety and waiting. Our modern celebration reflects a confluence of some or all of these stories. Yet what strikes me today, and especially this week with our celebration of Lag BaOmer, is just how tenuous our joy, our states of joy and our states of mourning can be. I've been thinking a lot this week of the line from the end of Psalm 30, "You turned my mourning into dancing." But the truth is, in our lives, our mourning gets turned to dancing, and sometimes back into mourning, and sometimes back into dancing. And there are times as well when we hold the smile on our face at the same time that we're holding tears in our hearts. And I think this comes up often in our Jewish practice, whether that's our tradition of saying Yizkor on our most joyous holidays, whether it's stomping on the glass at a wedding, whether it's counting the mournful days of the Omer and taking a break to celebrate on Lag BaOmer. And I think it's especially true of our days right now, as our arms recover from their soreness of getting our own COVID shots, while untold thousands still suffer in India and really throughout the world. Or as we appreciate some measure of justice for George Floyd, as we continuously are bombarded with reports of unarmed Black men being killed by police. It's hard to hold this all at once. And I want to close with a couple more words from Arthur Waskow, words that I found to offer some reassurance, but also challenge us not to let ourselves down. He writes about the Omer: 7 weeks of 7 days, day by day, week by week, the community watches the spring grain grow, watches with hope and anxiety. Day by day, week by week, the community moves forward from the moment of freedom's first explosion, moves forward with hope and with anxiety. Will the earth succeed in unfolding its fruitfulness? Will we succeed in finding rest and new truth in our freedom? Day by day, week by week, the community counts the days of growing grain, and through them counts the unfolding of the earth and of our own potential. Day by day, week by week, for this is no holy day, not even a week-long festival, but truly a season of the year. A season full of hope, full of anxiety that hope may fail.